There are voices that warm a room. There are voices that make the room stand up and tremble. Then there are voices that arrive like a verdict. Inevitable, undeniable. Imagine that voice born not in a studio, but in the dim corner of a coal miner's terrace. Imagine it forged in fever and kept alive by a stubborn private music no one else could hear. This is the story of a boy who sang his way out of a deathbed, who turned the world upside down with a single hit, and who carried a private sorrow, a wound that applause could not heal. This is the story of Tom Jones. Thomas John Woodward was born into a landscape of soot and song, Pontypridd, South Wales, on June 7, 1940. A coal mining town where each house felt the rhythm of the pit and the winter air tasted of work. Pontypridd was a place where survival was practical and music was a fragile, luminous refusal. He learned to sing at family gatherings, in church choirs, and at the kitchen table. The voice that would later stun arenas began quietly, as the sound that could make his family look up from their plates. Encyclopedia Britannica. Tom Jones. Official website. When tragedy struck at 12, it wasn't a headline. It was a room. Tuberculosis took him from the playground and locked him under a thin blanket in a small bedroom for nearly 2 years. For a boy who loved sound, enforced silence was its own kind of torment. He later remembered those nights as a place of imaginary melodies, of humming to keep the spirit alive. That private rehearsal, fevered and solitary, shaped the tonal thickness, the aching vibrato, and the unbearable intimacy of the voice we now consider legendary. Wikipedia. There's a particular hunger that makes some children dangerous, not with fists, but with ambition. For Tom, hunger tasted like coal dust and possibility. He left school early, took odd jobs, and at night he learned the gospel, blues and R&B records that filtered into Britain from the United States. The smoky working men's clubs became his conservatory. He sang with a presence that made you forget the cigarette smoke. People who saw him then tell of a voice that seemed larger than his frame, one that could knock the room into breathless stillness, and then demand more. Chapter 2. The slow build, the manager, the moment. Names change the way history remembers people. Tommy Scott became Tom Jones, a cleaner, sharper title for a man who was about to be amplified. In 1963, he joined the Senators, hauling amps across wet nights, learning how to translate hunger into performance. Moving from village halls to London stages, he carried with him not just a voice, but a muscle of performance built on survival. It is a truth about some artists. The harder the beginning, the more the middle will demand. Then came the man who pushed the lever, Gordon Mills. Mills heard in Jones not just a great singer, but a brand, a star, an engine. He reworked the act, arranged the recording sessions, and in 1965, a single landed that would tilt the world. It's Not Unusual. The song, bright, brass-powered, cheeky, and defiant, became a phenomenon. Radio plays became a national obsession. Television appearances followed. In a few hard-angled weeks, a coal miner's boy from South Wales was a fixture in the British charts and an emergent international star. Wikipedia, YouTube. What's easy to miss in that swing from pubs to prime time is the cost. Overnight celebrity accelerates everything: the hotel rooms, the demands, the applause. It also exposes old wounds to new light. Tom learned showmanship from necessity and charisma from pressure. He was learning, too, how to be sold as much as how to sing. In the late 1960s, Tom Jones became more than records. He became spectacle. This Is Tom Jones, his television show, arrived in American living rooms and made him a household name across the Atlantic. It allowed audiences to taste the rawness up close, the footwork, the swagger, the grin that suggested mischief and promise. When he toured Las Vegas, he learned another lesson: that spectacle rewards excess. The audience loved the excess. Critics sometimes recoiled. But this paradox is at the heart of so many great entertainers. The same trait that creates legend can also create trouble. Tom Jones. Official website Tom's style was not merely aesthetic. He embodied a lineage of performers who understood that a stage was a place to claim reality. When he sang, whether a ballad or a raucous number, there was a sense that he was waging a personal war against anything that kept him small. And that felt, to the audience, like truth. From It's Not Unusual to What's New Pussycat, from green grass of home to Delilah, Tom Jones's catalog spanned playfulness and heartbreak. He could stretch from cheeky pop to aching narrative without losing the thread of his personality. That range kept him relevant across decades. In the 1970s and 80s, he was a staple. Live shows, television specials, and records that kept the motors turning. He had not only the pipes, but a stagecraft that turned several lines into territory. There is a kind of cultural muscle memory involved. Certain songs attached themselves to eras. His voice became the soundtrack for lives across generations. But as much as success validated him, it also complicated his private world. Linda Trenchard was the girl who waved at a bedridden boy and later married him when they were both young. A 16-year-old marriage that produced a son, Mark, and an uneasy lifetime partnership in the public eye. Linda, by many accounts, was the central quiet of Tom's life. The person who stayed behind the curtains while the man on stage took the bows. Fame phrase relationships. Between touring and temptations, between the public appetite for an image and a private need for repair, Tom made choices that would echo for decades. He admitted later in life to a long history of infidelities and to a chaotic private life that asked for forgiveness it sometimes could not earn. In the late 1980s, another son, Jonathan Berkery, arrived from an extramarital relationship. The confirmation of paternity came years later and was followed by a public estrangement that never fully healed. This is where the two stories, the one he performed and the one he lived, collided. The image of a freewheeling rock star collided with the ledger of human cost. For Tom, the ledger was not just regret. It was an invitation to reckon.
Some artists, late in life, make the decision to remove the decorators, to see what the architecture looks like without the chandeliers. Albums like Praise and Blame, 2010, a stripped, gospel-tinged record, and later Spirit in the Room and Surrounded by Time were more than music, they were confessions rendered in melody. Critics who once cheered the spectacle sometimes balked at the intimacy, fans who wanted the hit sometimes resisted the change. But for Tom, these records were honesty. Praise and Blame felt like a return to the core, code that said, "This is how I sound when I face my own shadow." It was an artist making a deliberate choice to say less and mean more. In early 2016, the couple's private fight with fate reached a public moment. Linda was diagnosed with lung cancer. Tom, who had spent much of his life on the road, canceled shows and rushed to her side. In the sterile white of the hospital, the man who had spent decades performing for crowds met a private cruelty that had nothing to do with reviews. Linda's last clear message was not of recrimination but of insistence. "You must not fall with me. Promise me you'll keep going." She died on April 10, 2016. For Tom, the silence after that was something physical. He left their Los Angeles mansion, sold furniture full of memory, and moved back to Britain, not to retreat, but to survive. He later said he kept some of her clothes untouched and would speak to her picture. The stage remained, but the light felt different. Now it illuminated absence as much as acclaim. There are cold facts that help anchor a life in time: the dates, the awards, the honors. Tom Jones's career has milestones that underline the scope of his work. He rose to global fame in the mid-1960s, secured long-running television and stage success, and was ultimately recognized by the British Crown when he was knighted in 2006, an official coronation of a career that began in smoke-filled pubs and ended up on palace carpets. Deseret News. Later, in 2021, Tom released Surrounded by Time, an album that landed at #1 on the official UK Albums Chart, a chart-topping statement decades into a career so many believed would be dust by then. That album was a challenge to any notion of an artist who must fade quietly. It instead reiterated that a voice, if tended and lived through, can mature like old wood. It colors, deepens, and becomes richer. Surrounded by Time's commercial success wasn't an accident. It was the result of decades of trust between performer and public, and of a man's willingness to turn honestly toward his own reflection. Official charts. Over the years, Tom faced notes that were not purely musical. Accusations, cultural scrutiny, and the revealing pages of autobiographies have complicated the public's understanding of him. He acknowledged later in life that celebrity often rewards ego, and that such reward can mask damage caused to others. Confessions and apologies followed, not necessarily as absolution, but as a record of a man trying, finally, to reckon with the consequences of his actions. Reckoning in public is complicated. Some accept apology as a starting point. Some cannot. For Tom, the pattern was uneven, acts of contrition mixed with periods of silence. The larger truth, though, is that the man changed over time, the swagger thinned, and something like humility edged in. He is, in his 80s, still a touring man, slower, more careful, but still intoxicating on stage. There have been hip replacements, bouts of laryngitis, cancelled dates and headlines speculating on fragility. That the man still walks out and opens his mouth should not be underplayed. To perform at any age takes strength, but to do it at decades into a career takes a specific kind of bravery. Fans who watch an older singer perform often describe the same sensation. It's not the power that overwhelms so much as the lifetime behind each syllable. This is what gives later performances their potency. When Tom sings now, he is singing with a ledger of memory, with a chest full of the seasons he's lived, and audiences listen differently because of that. If you trim a life down to a montage, the hits, the awards, the tabloid lines, you lose the texture. Tom Jones's legacy is not a tidy list. It is a complicated weave, the soundtrack of family living rooms, the outsized, breathy moments in theaters, the apologies that quietly ripple. The songs that were lifelines to him and to strangers, and the resilience that made him return to music again and again. His performance style influenced generations, his television presence helped export British pop culture abroad, and his albums, esoteric, soulful, and sometimes blunt, taught audiences that reinvention could be sincere where reinvention sometimes is only cosmetic. At the end of a long night's run, an artist returns to a dressing room. Behind the curtain, all that remains is a man facing the mirror. He checks his throat, smooths a coat, and thinks of what he has lost and what he has given. Tom Jones's mirror would reflect illness survived, a marriage of decades, a son who managed his business, sons in the wings of the family story, and, threaded through all this, the music that both saved and complicated him. There is a moral in songs like, I Won't Crumble With You If You Fall, one he sang with an earnest, weary sincerity on shows like The Voice UK, promises sometimes hold when words are converted into action. For Tom, singing is action. As long as he sings, he keeps certain promises alive, to Linda, to himself, and to the small, stubborn boy who once refused to let the music die in a dark room. Why do we return, again and again, to the same voice? For some, it is nostalgia, for others, sheer admiration. For many, it is because certain voices are like weather, they make you feel the room differently. Tom Jones's voice has weathered coal dust and fever, superstardom and scandal, grief and solace. It has worn the seasons of his life openly, sometimes noisily, sometimes quietly. If there is a lesson here, it is not one of perfection. It is one of persistence. The boy who imagined melodies in the dark, the young husband whose choices broke a heart, the superstar who learned to bow, each of these lives is part of a single arc, a human life, complicated and honest, trying to be held together in song. So the next time you hear, "It's Not Unusual," on an old radio or stumble across his voice in the middle of the night, remember this: you're not only listening to a hit. You are listening to the echo of a life. A life that refused to be small. A life that insisted, loudly and imperfectly, on being heard.